Hey everybody, and welcome to today's video where we are going to see how we can model a quilted top dining chair. Namely, this chair is going to have a bit of a unique challenge to it, namely the reason that we are not going to have an actual blueprint to follow for this chair, but instead we're going to have a couple of different reference images, and those reference images are going to have a slight perspective distortion. So we're going to have to compensate for that. First, before we start doing anything with the modeling, let's take a quick gander at what sort of a chair we're going to be trying to recreate. As we can see right here, here's a close-up, and as you can see, the whole chair is created by one fabric, and on the sides we have this quilted material. So at the edges we can see that we have a certain piping for it. And here's how this chair looks like. And on the bottom we have, well, pretty simple wooden legs, which shouldn't be that hard to recreate. So more or less that's all we have about this chair. And the last feature, I guess, that we can mention is that in this side of the chair we have this inward stitching, so we should take that into account as well. So other than these images, the only other piece of info that I have is the width, depth, and height for this chair, and at what height the seat should be. So since I know that, what I've done is I've created this box, and in this box what I have is the length, which is 58 centimeters, the width is 63 centimeters, and the height at 79 centimeters. And also, as you can see, I have this line in here, and that line was added with the edit poly. I just put a line at the height of 50 centimeters, and that's the height for the seat. So now, if I make this see-through, I can see that more or less it kind of goes around the whole chair, but we have this little bit of the chairs going through the bottom and kind of sticking out. And also, this is the height for the chair where it's supposed to be, and here I can see that, well, this is not where it starts. So what we have to do here is take into account that there will be some distortion or perspective distortion for it. All right, so now let's continue, or let's start by modeling the most prominent piece for this chair, and that is going to be the backrest. So for this, I'm going to start from the front viewport. First thing I'm going to do is hide my box, the bounding box for this thing. Go in here, make a plane that is going to cover up this edge right here. All right, something like this. Now I'm going to press Alt-X to make this thing see-through again. Get this thing down to like 1 and 1. So now I have this box. And what I can see is I can actually see what is the form for this side. So I know that I want to have this thing come more to this side. So I'm going to add in 2 edges and put an edit poly on top of here. So move this edge further up, more or less at around the place where the curve is starting to appear, something like here. This I can actually even remove this for now because I won't need it, and add in one more line here with the Swift loop, probably about here, or more or less where the line is starting. And now move this thing here. Now let's simply put these into position right where they're supposed to be, underneath that piping, like so. All right, awesome. So basically I have this thing done. Now if I unhide my original and move this thing up a bit, you're going to notice that more or less this is exactly the height that I want to have, because this bottom line here is where the 50 centimeters is supposed to be at. And as you can see, this is the top of the line, and since I'm following this, even with the perspective distortion, I'm still within the actual size for this chair. Now I'm going to hide this again. And what I want to do is select the border here, and in the left viewport, actually I'm going to move this thing to the front about here. And now what I want to do is select my border, hold down Shift, and pull it back to about there once. Now why am I putting it just to about here? I'm actually going to put it around there. The reason why I'm putting it here is that I can see that right around this part, the chair is starting to turn to get that nice arc there. So up until here, the chair is going to be very flat. So this is more or less where this chair is going to start rising up a bit. Also, another thing that I want to make sure that I fix while I'm at this point is that I can notice that the chair around here has this turn, but as it comes to the chair over here, it's very, very round. So it no longer has that dip. So what I can do in order to get away from that dip is just move this thing a bit down, move this thing around here. So now it's a more round look. Now, the next thing I want to do is take one more extrusion here. So hold on Shift, pull it all the way back till about here, like so. And now, once I'm here, I want to rotate this for 90 degrees. So 90 degrees like so. And in the left viewport, move it all the way up to the center, something like here. All right, great. Now, with this thing moved there, what I want to do is I'm gonna go in, put in one more line over here, just to help me with that shape. Move this thing upwards like so. Move this thing inwards, just so we get that dip, or try at least to follow it as close as possible like that. Awesome. Now, I have this very sharp turn, so in order to make it less of a sharp turn, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Swift Loop again, and this time around I'm going to hold down Shift, so click, and this thing is going to put one line in here in the middle that is going to be in between both of these edges, and it's going to have the set flow applied to it because I was holding down Shift. So again, I'm going to put in a few more Swift loops, so you can either click here or my shortcut. So one more here and one more there. So now I'm getting this turn, which is more or less what I want to have for this chair. But from what I can see, I think it's a bit too steep, but we'll see in a second. Before I do that, I want to make sure that I'm only working on half of this. So I want to take my pivot and snap it over here. So now when I put symmetry, it's going to symmetry or mirror this thing on the other side as well. All right, so this thing looks okay. So let's unhide all and see if this thing is really in the middle. And from what I can see, I've been really close. Oh, actually, I've been perfectly snapped in the middle. That's awesome. All right, so hide this again. And now let's do a bit of a fix up on this thing, because from here I can see that this thing is supposed to follow this curve, more or less something like this. And more importantly, while I'm at this step before I start adding in any more geometry, I want to make sure that here this turn is not this steep. So I just want to move this thing to the back a bit until I get a more gradual turn or a more natural turn. Something like so. If we had a blueprint, we wouldn't have to do this thing or just doing it by eye, but in this case we just have to like wing it as closely as possible. And the next thing that we want to do is, I can see in this chair that this portion where the back is going to rest is not as thin as this portion. So this means that as soon as it starts getting into this turn, this thing has a bit more thickness to it. So in order to get that thickness back, what I can do is select all of these polygons, move them up a bit like so. So now after we put in Turbo Smooth, we should get that edge to look better. All right, so with this done, let's continue adding in more details. To get this nice look, I'm gonna go and put an edit poly on top of this here, and I'm gonna put a turbo smooth on top of everything else, so something like this. As we can see now, it's smooth, but it's really having problems holding these edges. So before we go to the turbo smooth, I want to go down here while I'm in edit poly, put one edge at the bottom, like so, put one over here, and I can even try to put in one at the edge over here, but let's see without it how it looks like. And from what I can see, even without adding in that final edge that's supposed to be holding this side, like so, and making this thing a lot sharper, even if I don't use that, I'm okay with how this thing looks like. Now, since, again, I don't want to have to work on both sides, I'm going to put another symmetry on top of this, and all the edges I put in here, we can see them here. So now when I turn on the turbo smooth, I get this thing to have this shape. Again, I think I can probably go in here and just slightly, and I do mean slightly, move this thing to the back a bit. There we go. Turn on the turbo smooth. Okay. Move this thing off here, up there. All right, so with the turbo smooth now, we should get that look where it's more declined in the front, and then it's going to a more front or more rounded look here. And this is with the iteration it's 1. I'm going to try and keep it as low because I want to add in more refinement later on. But before I do that, I need to add in some more details in here. So now, let's take care of the piping for this thing. As I can see, I have that piping going all across the front and at the edge of this chair, which is basically where the quilting starts. So as you can see, this piping is like more like a border between what you're having for the chair as a material and what you have for the quilting. So let's go ahead and define that line. What I'm going to do for that is on top of the turbo smooth, I'm going to put yet another edit poly. Select all the edges where I'm going to have piping, but now since this is red and we're every time I'm selecting something is red, it's really crappy for visuals. I'm going to change the color for this thing for something like blue. There you go. So now select all the edges where I'm going to see that piping, and as I can see in my image over here, that piping goes all the way around here and comes back around here and goes on the outer side of this chair. All right, so that's awesome. But actually, I just noticed something. Before I go in and start adding in a lot more details, what I want to do here is, while I'm still at fairly low density for my geometry, is I want to make sure that in here or somewhere around here I have this line going across something like in this manner. So when we're gonna start modeling all the rest of the details, this line we don't have to add in an extra edit poly and try to get this thing done, but instead we can follow one of the edges that we already have. So for this, I'm going to put on my edge constraint here and try to move these guys in slightly until I get them into a point where they're following that line that I want. So as you can see, I'm not screwing around with the geometry for this thing or the shape for the chair, but let's see, if I move those, I'm going to screw with the chair. So I'm trying to just move the vertices and still keep the same. There we go. I can probably move this thing without the edge constraint. Move it inwards like so. All right, so now when I turn on the turbo smooth, I should get that thing. Yeah, there we go. That line is being followed better now. All right, back to what we were doing. Namely, we are trying to define where that line is going to go. So all across here at the bottom, and go over here on the outer side, select this line. It's going to go across the whole thing, so don't worry about it, just work on one side. And now the piping, actually, if we take a look at a closer look at it, we can see here that we have this natural dip for it, and then we have the actual piping. So first we want to do is encompass that dip for the geometry. So we're going to hold with the edges selected, we're going to go and extrude this thing inwards. So a width of, let's try something like 0.1 and a dip of, whoa, this is way too much. So something like, I don't know, maybe minus 0.2 centimeters would do fine. Or we can try even something lower. Just make sure it's not folding on itself, so it's going to create any problems. So something like this is fine. It's great. All right, okay. There we go. So now if I zoom in here, that's actually okay, not too many problems. And again, since we were only working on one side, I want to put a symmetry on it. In this case, just make sure, since we did this thing, make sure the symmetry is not welding, or the threshold for the symmetry is not too big, just a very small symmetry threshold. Otherwise, it might weld the cuts in here. So now when we put another Turbo Smooth on top of this, we're going to have this nicely defined dip where that piping is supposed to go. So once we have both of those Turbo Smooths on with one iteration, what I'm going to do here again is put another edit poly. And this edit poly is only going to be used so I can select the actual piping that we just did. So now, let's see, this is the problem that I was talking about. Something went wrong, and now I have to go back, and there we go, exactly. What I've done is, while I was doing the actual extrusion, I'm guessing somehow I managed to deselect some of the edges. So now I have to fix this issue. So there we go. Extrude. All right, well, at least now you're going to know how to fix this, and whenever you're modeling stuff like this, it's normal that stuff like this is going to happen. So in case you have something like that, just go back, Control Z, do the same thing again. So minus 0.23 with 0.1, click OK. That is fine. And again, symmetry with a very small amount, threshold, and another Turbo Smooth. And now we're back at where we were, just without that problematic place in there. All right, great. Now, next thing I want to do, as I was doing it previously, put another edit poly, select this line, like so. If everything is right, it's going to go all the way. So you're going to have a proper edge loop. Double click on this line. It's going to go all the way across on this side. So we can select this edge as well. And with this, now what we can do is create a shape. Make it a linear, or we can make it a smooth one. In this case, anything is going to work, but I'm actually going to go with linear, something like this, because we're going to have enough of geometry in here. And I want to go into rendering, enable in renderer, enable in viewport. Make sure the thickness is the right size, so it kind of fills in the place here. And there we go. We have piping for this thing. And we can control how this thing is going to look like by just moving in these vertices, as you can see right here. There you go. If we have some problems, we can later turn on the Turbo Smooth and get a much smoother result like that. All right, so once we have this, now let's continue on with the more complex part of this chair, and that is adding in the well, not the more complex, but the detailing for this chair, and that is going to be adding this line, which I think we don't even have to go in this far, but we can probably go back to this level and just add in this cut. So let's go ahead and try to go down to this part part here. I actually no longer need this edit poly, so I'm going to delete it. I only use that one so I can get the piping for this chair, which is okay. So now what I'm going to do is get down to this edit poly, select one of the lines where I want to have that inward cut. In this case, I guess it's going to be probably somewhere around here, or maybe this line. Yeah, I think this line is going to be what I'm going to be looking for. All right, awesome. So once I have this, I want to make sure I selected all the way that it's going, all the edges that are going to be relevant for that cut. In this case, I want it to go as far as this edge goes. So as far as it goes until it gets to the point where it's going inside the piping. Now, for the bottom, it's probably going to go up until here, because we're going to have the cushion in this part, so it's not really going to be seen anything underneath here. So what I'm going to do is again just do a chamfer for this, and let me show you something else before we do this cut. If you take a look at here, the actual cut for this chair or the inward stitching, what you're going to notice is that we have this dip or this inward extrusion, but before we get to it, we have this slight bump. So it's kind of the place where the fabric is being conjoined. So in order to get that, if we just go and add in extrusion, inward extrusion, we're going to get that cut. But just to make it a bit better, we have to contain that. So we can do that by just doing a small chamfer. So something like, I don't know, maybe 0.1, like so. Put in one segment in here, and now select that same segment that we just created. Again, just select all the places where it's going to be valid for, like there. Great. Actually gonna deselect that and that one. Let's try on the upper side as well. I want to have that thing go into the, there we go, both of those. So now I'm simply going to add in one little extrude. There we go. A very small extrusion. Okay. So now when we turn on everything, we should have this thing, but from what I can see, it's a very, very sharp edge. So probably a bit smaller cut. Like so. All right, awesome. Now, with this thing, I have these two cuts. So next what we have to do is create the seat and then turn on to the more complex quilting of this chair. But before we continue on with modeling this thing, I want to make it into a separate video because we've been going on for about 20 minutes now. So I hope you guys had fun up until now. You managed to learn something new. If you do have any questions, leave them below. I will meet you in the comment section of the video. And if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and check out the continuation video where we are going to continue creating this chair. And if you're not subscribed, now is a great time to do so. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.